My name is John Bartlett, and I moved to New York in 1986 to attend FIT. I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, had a very kind of normal Midwestern upbringing, very Brady Bunch, that kind of Partridge Family obsession. And for my undergraduate, I went to Harvard. I studied sociology and night clubbing. And it was while I was at Harvard, I'd always loved clothing, but I wasn't sure, I never considered myself a creative person. And it was at Harvard that I kind of came into my own as far as my style. And every day it was a costume party for me. These were the days of Bridesheads Revisited, but also the days of Vivienne Westwood. So there was a whole kind of juxtaposition happening in my own head while I was at Harvard. After Harvard, I went to London for about 6 months, again under the auspices of studying, and my parents thought I was studying economics, but after 2 weeks of being in London, I dropped out, cashed into my tuition, and basically spent it on hair extensions, earrings, body map, everything that my parents couldn't deal with when I came home. And I remember arriving home from London to Cincinnati in 1986, and my parents were shaking, not understanding this person in front of them. The only thing left for me to do, I think, was to move to New York City and study fashion. So when I came to New York, I started taking night classes and took draping and sewing, things that I had never done before, and my mother actually used to make fun of me because I used to hold scissors with these two fingers, and so it took me a while to become accustomed to making clothing. When I found out that there was a menswear program at FIT, I went bananas because finally I could take a class and learn a skill, but I could also make clothing to wear out to the pyramid that night. And that was very, very exciting for me. And the point of that is, for me, is that fashion has always been a point of expression, a mode of expression. The period that I was starting to study fashion and menswear was a period where Perry Ellis died, Calvin Klein got married to a woman, and this was a period when I think being a gay designer, whether you're doing menswear or women's wear, was something that you were not really speaking about, that really was known within the industry, but not publicly. When I first started in 1992, I had my first collections, and I had worked for a couple of designers. I think my idea was to create clothing that was very American. We were all very inspired by Europe at the time, but something very American, kind of dorky, and certainly not really sexy. And so one of my first collections was inspired by Forrest Gump. In those days, it was all about a nurse stocking, Birkenstocks, mixing argyles and stripes, and taking models who weren't models and throwing them on the runway. In the same show, however, I showed boys in high heels with wearing lipstick. I showed women who were very openly lesbian wearing the men's clothes. So while the initial sort of theme was about Forrest Gump and this very American, naive, innocent guy, it kind of morphed into a darker show at the end that was very much about gender bending, cross-dressing, and very much about Berlin. One of my later collections, as I was really starting to work my, I guess my obsession and fascination with sexuality, gender, and what is fashionable and sexy for men, I started looking backwards in a retro way at After Dark magazines. So one of my collections was all about leather, facial hair, the 70s look. As I grow older, as I matured, my sense of what was interesting stylistically also changed. So this collection was all about bears, and I found, again, a lot of guys that were not models. I wanted to show them out in the woods with log carriers, a lot of corduroy, suede, and again, something that was very unusual, I guess, because the editors and the buyers were so used to seeing the same number of models in every show, and bringing in guys that were kind of real guys with real bodies, to me was very exciting. One of the themes that I think most menswear designers, and I think fashion designers in general, are very inspired by is military. And the thing that I love about military clothing is that it's a combination of form and function. There's incredible functionality to the clothing, but the decoration, the buttons, the epaulets, there's so much beauty in these clothes as well that I find endless inspiration. The Sam Brown belt on the left, I did in navy leather, the jodhpurs, hiking boots, the kind of military officer's coat to the far right. These are things that I think are just part of a menswear vernacular. One of my other inspirations, again, artist, is Jean Genet. This is such an iconic photograph, and to me, is something that you see again over and over in fashion magazines, people kind of taking this as their inspiration, and I love everything about this photograph. But what I also loved about Genet were his stories, and one in particular was a story called Corel, and Fassbinder made a film about it with Brad Davis. What I loved about it was the simple kind of sailor looks that you got from this that were very, very eroticized. And that sailor theme has continued in my work and in my collection even today, using sailor stripes, but then mixing them back with black watch plaids, knit caps. But these kind of things now today are a little bit more mainstream, whereas I think 10 years ago, those sort of looks coming from that kind of Fassbinder film were much more out there. And as my work evolves, I want to make sure always that there's a celebration of the male body, but it's getting more and more subtle. It's not so much about hustlers and porn stars parading down a runway. It's much more ingrained in our society, and that's really what I think is so exciting about today. Being a gay designer is secondary, being a designer is first, although that sensibility certainly comes through, but now it really is part of the norm.